And while most of the other groups we've studied belong in a kingdom or domain, protists, we might have to put it in quotation marks, it's really more kind of a leftover group, a collection of kingdoms, if you will, but it's kind of inconvenient to think about all these different kingdoms. So these are really the leftovers. What I would say in general about them is that they are eukaryotes that are mostly single-celled and live in water. But that's a really overgeneralization. Now, you may think that protists don't play much of a role in your life, and compared to most of the other ones, they probably don't, but they're more common than you might think. Let's take a look at some of the major groups of protists. In terms of our classification scheme, we're talking about these guys right here. First, where do we find protists? Pretty much anywhere there's moisture. They're really common in water, so in the ocean, streams, lakes, places like that. But even moist soil, snow, or inside of bodies, you'll find protists. Let's take a look at a few examples. When it comes to classifying protists, I'm going to stick with 3 functional groups. Now, these are not taxonomic groups. That's an ever-changing quagmire. There's about 21 groups recognized right now. And so this is a purely functional, super simplistic view. So you need to recognize that any 2 organisms I show you on the same screen could be as closely related as elephants and daisies. I'm going to start with the so-called protozoans, so the sort of pre-animals, zoo referring to an animal. These are usually unicellular. They're eukaryotic, so they have a nucleus. You can see that nucleus right here in the amoeba. They usually have some way of moving around, like these guys down here have little cilia that they use to move about. And that's about all I'm going to say about the protozoans. Algae basically work like the plants of the water world. They live in lakes, in oceans, even in moist soil. And they play sort of the same role as plants do. They're primary producers, forming the basis of these food chains, but in aquatic ecosystems. And they're really variable. So they come in different colors. There are green ones. There are colonial green ones. There's red algae with different pigments that even live on the snow. Like here, there's brown algae and golden algae, some huge like kelp. What's this doing here? That's an ice cream cone. Oh, yeah. So a lot of kelp and other algae are harvested for special carbohydrates that they have. You'll see it on food labels sometimes as alginic acid or carrageenan, and these are thickeners. You find them in all kinds of stuff. You find them in ice cream and lipstick, even paint. It's used as a thickener. So you eat actually quite a bit of algae without even knowing it. Other groups of algae are somewhat dangerous. These dinoflagellates, these strange looking guys, cause red tides. It looks like somebody dumped a bunch of paint in the ocean. Here, for perspective, this is a boat. And when these bloom, they produce these toxins that kill fish, they wash up on the shore, and shellfish accumulate them. And it can be dangerous to eat those shellfish, which is why pregnant women are advised to avoid clams and mussels and other shellfish while they're pregnant. A whole group of fungus-like protists, and they operate very differently. So they're kind of like the molds of water, breaking down dead material. Some of them invade plant leaves, like this powdery mildew, and others, these slime molds, are really bizarre. And at some points in their life, they look like this amoeba. They're single-celled. And then they'll congregate into this multicellular fan-like mass until conditions get tough, and then they form these little mushroom-like fruiting bodies that hatch out spores that land and become amoeba again. They do some really bizarre things. Now, since protists are kind of a leftover group, it's hard to say much about their structure exactly. Some are one-celled, some are gigantic, made of many, many cells, larger than us. And most of them have cell walls, although there's plenty of examples. We talked before about dinoflagellates as dangerous protists, but there are also some diseases. Amoeba and also this giardia can end up in waterways, and if you swallow them, and are not used to them, if your immune system is not, then it can cause pretty severe diarrhea. These guys in here, this is a malaria plasmodium cell. And these invade our red blood cells, cause high fevers, and kill still about 500,000 people a year, even in the 21st century. And then there are a whole host of diseases in plants. They're always tricky because since their cells are so like other eukaryotes, they're a little difficult to get rid of. We won't get into it in this class, but there's some really bizarre life cycles that go on with these guys, especially in seaweed. So most organisms like us have 2 sets of DNA. Same is true of the plants outside. And when they go to reproduce sexually, they cut down to 1 and produce pollen, ovules, or for, in our case, sperm and eggs. In seaweed, at least some of them, they can take those sex cells, they land and produce a whole new plant that looks just like the old one. I mean, that would be weird. That would be like a pine tree having that pollen drift off, it land and produce a new pine tree that only had 1 set of chromosomes, while its parent still had 2. And then that one could fertilize another one and produce another pine tree. Some really bizarre stuff going on that I'm not really going to try to give you any sort of overview other than to say it's weird and they can reproduce different ways. Surprisingly, when it comes to getting energy, protists do it all. Obviously, algae photosynthesize, but they make different pigments than regular plants do. Others eat things. They can gobble up small particles, and even others absorb them a lot like fungi do. Well, no doubt about it, protists are a weird group of organisms. They kind of help me appreciate the diversity of life out there and just the really strange ways that organisms go about just making it through life. So I hope that brings some appreciation to you as well. In terms of how they intersect our lives, it's kind of some strange and surprising ways. You know, there's the straightforward bad effects like causing malaria, which is a really serious disease, and a few other diseases as well, but they also have some really good effects. They form the basis of aquatic food chains so that we have fish to eat. Some of those actually sank to the bottom of the ocean and made chalk. You know, that's where chalk came from. A lot of this is protists. And others intersect our lives in really kind of surprising ways. You know, I know it's not lunchtime, but I think I'll enjoy some protists now.